Hi, it's a privilege to be here today, and I'd like to start out a little bit differently and just ask all of us to take about 30 seconds to remember those that are not with us this year and those that are in our membership and in our prayers and our thoughts. Just take 30 minutes of silent meditation before I start. I think I said 30 minutes. I'm sorry to make you, I was going to let you sleep through the first 30 minutes of my talk. I meant 30 seconds. So with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some unique occupations today and give you a little bit of history, and then we're going to turn it over to talk about some situations that are happening as we sit here today. So with that, I'd like to talk about some unique occupations and some unique exposures. But first, let us go back and look at how long we've had this with us. Asbestos is a disease. It's a mineral. It causes a disease. It's been with us for many, many thousands of years. It was called diseases of slaves, and it dates back to the weaving of asbestos and flax. More recently, asbestos has become a commercial product in the late 1800s, and this is because of its physical characteristics and its ability to be spun and its resistance to fire. And it's really occupied a position that has spurred about 3,000 or more different products that have been used in the world today, from things like incubators for babies that were used in a hospital in Cincinnati in the 1890s. And it was also even touted as in one advertisement that I've seen, as in caskets to keep people from going the wrong way when they went to their next level of existence. So it's had a very interesting and ornery history in many ways. Some of the highlights of the production are, when we started commercially, it wasn't a very big industry, $19,000, and in just a few years it became over $1 million, and we'll hear today how much more money it has generated for those that have profited by its use. It was a good time for miners. They were making a lot of money. They had little overhead. And as a result of that, they started using it in selected occupations. Many occupations I'm not going to talk about today, but I'd like to just highlight some. The father of modern occupational medicine is a guy by the name of Bernardo Ramazzini. In 1713, Ramazzini went a little bit further than what Hippocrates did in his mandate to physicians. What Ramazzini did, he said, ask, what is your occupation? Very important thing that physicians need to do today is talk about occupations. The working with asbestos starts in the mine, and it goes all the way through to the end product users. And we're going to talk about this in more detail today. But I want to start with a little bit about epidemiology, because it's a really contentious area today. Many people say, well, you can't show causation unless you have an epidemiological study, and you have to study every one of these occupations. And I'm going to show you why that isn't true. What are some of the myths of causation? Well, many say you have to have a standard mortality ratio, and for those that are not scientists, a doubling of the risk basically is what we're talking about. And if you don't have that, then there's no disease. Well, that's ridiculous, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. And we're going to talk also about some of the facts of asbestos causation. What do we know about asbestos? Well, we know that it causes asbestosis, a scarring of the lung. We know it causes lung cancer. We know it causes mesothelioma. And we know it causes gastrointestinal cancers, even though the National Academy of Science may tell us differently in some cases. But we can go into that in a little bit more detail if you want to at a later time. It's a dose-response disease. It's an exposure concentration is significant. The more exposure, the greater the risk of disease. The less exposure, the less the risk of disease. Asbestosis is the only one of the pneumoconiosis, or the dust-related lung diseases, that's still increasing in this country today. Silicosis, cold workers' pneumoconiosis, all the rest are decreasing. Asbestosis is still increasing. Asbestosis in lung cancer can occur in both smokers as well as non-smokers. And mesothelioma is clearly unreported. In the SEER data set that has been set up by the National Cancer Institute, in some areas the underreporting is as high as 80%. So we don't really know how much mesothelioma is out there. And we're going to see that when doctors don't ask about occupation and don't ask about exposure, and they don't put it on the death certificate. I was just working on a case this last week where the death certificate said coronary artery disease and an acute respiratory disease as cause of death. Down in the bottom corner, which doesn't get counted in the statistics, it says mesothelioma, comma, diabetes. So this is not an uncommon thing. What about the facts of causation? Well, you usually need a study, and I'm not going to spend much time on this because this is not really a scientific audience. Some of you are here, but you need a study that shows significance, where you have a 95% confidence that you're finding something that is not due to chance. Unfortunately, the majority of studies before 1980 really didn't introduce these calculations. Many times these were just left out. And so when we use these to show causation, the critics come up and say, well, you can't show it because it's not in the paper. Latency of disease, this is another factor. These diseases caused by asbestos are taking 20, 30, 40, 50 years to occur, and as we experience lower exposures, their latency is going to increase in time. So it's going to be more common to see diseases occurring at very late ages in life that are due to low exposures earlier in life. As I said, an SMR is usually a standard mortality ratio, a doubling of the risk. Many argue, and some courts have even said, that you can't show causation unless you have an SMR of 2 or greater. Well, what if you have a significant number of studies that have a 95% confidence interval that does not include 1, and the SMR is, say, 1.5? What does that mean? Well, to me as a scientist, that means there's significance. To courts, including some state Supreme Courts, they don't agree with that. So unfortunately, today, much of our science is being directed not only by public opinion, but by judges and lawyers that have no scientific background. We need to have well-controlled studies. Well-controlled studies mean that you have to look for the confounders and the other problems that are occurring in the studies. A recent study published this month in the Journal of Cancer, a journal of the National Cancer Institute, talks about mesothelioma being caused by therapeutic radiation. 3 studies are in this paper, a total of 26 cases of mesothelioma. The authors of the paper are funded by the 3 major auto industries. And they come to the conclusion that therapeutic radiation causes mesothelioma, trying to divert it away from the asbestos issue. In none of those cases do they go back and take an occupational history. Maybe they were exposed to asbestos. Here's a prestigious journal that is publishing this. I plan to comment on it to the editor because I think it's wrong. But science is being manipulated, people, and don't forget that. When we have case reports, as I did in my paper 2 years ago, of brake workers, I had 165 cases. The 3 auto companies said, that's not enough cases to talk about it. They got 26 now, but my 165 were not enough, and that was 2 years ago. So let's take a look and look inside of what's going on. Problems with the study of causation, and I'll go through this very quickly because I've already talked about it basically, but we have problems with healthy worker effect. That is, when people are working, they're generally healthier than the comparison populations. So sometimes you get low SMRs, and you have to take that into consideration. Many studies are done without adequate latency. You wouldn't expect to find a problem. They dilute the effects by putting secretaries and office workers in with production workers, so they're not at risk of developing disease, and it goes on and on. I'm just going to say this, that there are criteria out there, and I'm not going to go through all of these, that you should consider when doing epidemiological studies. And then you have to take in consideration whether chance is involved in this, and that's why we do the statistical analyses. Where is asbestos? It's everywhere. It's in ceiling tiles. It's in floor tiles. It's in wall and ceiling insulation, acoustical plastics, decorative plasters, sprayed and fireproof insulation, insulation for pipes and boilers, putties and cements, roofing shingles, siding shingles, joint compounds, brake linings, electrical wiring, electrical panel partitions, texturized paints. And these are just the places you can, some of the places you can still buy it today. It's not banned in this country. I think we'll hear more about that in a little bit. In structures built prior to 1981, we have it in floor tiles, and every time we go in and remodel, we have to talk about that. 1981, that's only a little over 20 years ago. Linoleum, this is some that's rolled up. Drywall joint compounds. Roofing materials, 80% of the asbestos used in this country today is in roofing materials. Mastics, this is a cold roof mastic, but there are many other types of mastics. Pipe and boiler insulation. We have it on sprayed on ceilings. We have it on popcorn ceilings. Now, what are some of the specific occupations? Bet you didn't know that that snow in the Wizard of Oz was asbestos. Hollywood has used asbestos for a long time. They used it to make the film White Christmas. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any good pictures of White Christmas, but watch it, you can see what asbestos looked like when it's used as snow. Actors have died. Our own musician, that Warren Zevon, but Paul Gleason, who many of you know has died of mesothelioma this year, been diagnosed with it. Boilermakers, and I'm going to go through these slides pretty quick, so you'll see them on the internet, hopefully. Confined spaces of Boilermakers. Here's a guy inside the boiler, probably with no respirator, because that's not unusual. These are some early pictures of workers. You don't see respirators on these. You don't really see much ventilation except in this last picture down in the right-hand corner. They sprayed it on inside the boilers. This guy has a suit on, but that's what it looks like inside the boiler. These are refinery bricks, the new bricks stacked up, the used bricks on the right. This is what they look like after they come out of the boiler. Boiler pipe insulation. Studies have shown excesses of lung cancer, mesothelioma. Mesothelioma in the Australian Tumor Registry for mesothelioma represents about 10.6 of the cases. Canadian study, 20% had X-ray and pulmonary function deficits. A Michigan study showed radiation or X-ray changes, 25%. Again, look at this after 10 years. So we're talking about the latency period. Petroleum chemicals workers. Asbestos thermal pipe insulation, used all over the chemical industry and the petroleum industry. But it's also used in some other places you may not think about, in bakeries. It's also used in the lining of the ovens. But here, if you look above the thermal pipe insulation, the gloves that the bakers wear sometimes contain asbestos. Study in Italy found mesotheliomas occurring in people in the bakery industry. And this brings up an interesting thing. We had the three sisters here that had possible genetic role. We don't know for sure what that genetic role is, but here's a family that worked in the bakery industry, and three in the family developed disease. Was it genetic, or was it exposure, or was it both? Another study in Italy found 5 additional mesotheliomas in bakers. What about brake repair and insulation workers? Installation workers. I got a tongue-tied mouth, sorry. But brake workers are still exposed throughout this country, and especially in mom and pop operations where you have small operations. They don't usually have ventilation. They usually still use the old blowout method. Dr. Castleman told me that the EPA is coming out with their gold book, hopefully this week, to talk about brake workers, reissuing that. The OSHA just reissued a report citing the paper that I wrote as the reference, which again upset the big three, but I guess we all have a chance to upset the big three. That's the auto big three. They've spent over $25 million to show that brakes don't cause disease, and that's under sworn testimony and litigation as of today. So it's not a small fight they're putting out there. Used brake pads, this is what they look like, and this is what the new ones look like. There's multiple studies. I reported 165 cases. The epidemiology, unfortunately, is equivocal, and that's because many of the studies suffer from lack of latency, dilution, and a multitude of other factors that you wouldn't find the disease if you looked in these studies from now until the millennium. You just wouldn't find it. We need better studies in this area. And just to go on and show you that these are some of the problems. A recent study out of France, 82% of the workers at very low exposures, going down to about 0.5 fibers per cc, had asbestos-related disease. And I won't go through all these, but I'll throw them up on the so you can look at it. Exposure still exceeds the OSHA PELs and the brakes that we've seen. Overall review you can find in my paper. I don't mean to be touting my horn, but it's the only paper out there that really does a review of the brake industry. Bricklayers and masons have an excess of mesothelioma and lung cancer, as well as asbestosis. Multiple studies have shown this. And I show these studies from around the world because this is not unique to the United States. This is throughout the world that we're seeing this. What about carpenters? Carpenters have multiple exposures because they're the ones putting up the structures. Ceiling tiles, wall paneling. All of you have been probably following the James Hardie issues in Australia concerning asbestos in their building material products. In the under 50 age group, and this is important because when you look at workers that develop an asbestos-related disease and compare them to people that have no history of a lung disease or an asbestos-related disease, asbestos workers are dying about 25 years younger than the normal population. And again, I just show you some multiple cases here that have been reported in the literature of mesothelioma among carpenters. Carpenters are a very high risk group for developing mesothelioma, not just the carpenters that are in commercial industry, but the home carpenters that do their home repair. What about custodians? Custodians, you wouldn't think would be at a high risk, but laborers and custodians, school custodians, and we're going to talk more about that, but this is what you might find in a school boiler where the asbestos, as you can see, is coming off of the pipe insulation here. We've seen cases of mesothelioma reported in custodial workers and maintenance workers. We've seen it in looking at the International Union of Laborers, an excess of lung cancer and mesothelioma. We've seen school maintenance workers. Overall, laborers have consistently had a higher risk of developing asbestos-related diseases. What about decorators? We wouldn't think that decorating could cause problems, but decorators can come into contact with asbestos in some of the products that are used. Some of the spray-on materials used for decorating Christmas trees have contained asbestos. Some of the other materials among decorators, and they've contained all types of asbestos. Electricians, here again, asbestos wires on the left-hand side and circuit boards on the right-hand side have asbestos in them. And they've been shown to be at a risk of developing both asbestosis-related mesotheliomas, asbestosis. What about firefighters? I think we're going to hear a lot more about firefighters as we go on today, but here's a case of Donald George Higley, who in this picture, which was a very famous picture, took of him fighting a fire in 1961, and down in the bottom you can see him in his asbestos suit. He died in 2004 of a mesothelioma. You're going to hear more about these risks. Jewelers. What about jewelers? Well, they sometimes use polishing compounds and other compounds and have been reported with the asbestos-related diseases. Insulation workers. We all have heard about insulation workers. They use spray-on. This is outlawed in the United States currently. Mechanics. Again, mechanics have been shown to have a variety of occupational-related, asbestos-related diseases, and I'm just going to go through these very quickly because I'm trying to keep to the time frame. Merchant seamen. Merchant seamen have had a lot of exposure to asbestos. Almost all the pipes and ships have been insulated with asbestos, primarily an amphibole asbestos, but a lot of chrysotile asbestos. World War II veterans are suffering from asbestos-related disease from these pipes that are around Nathan, as you can see in this picture. Even in their sleeping areas, there are asbestos pipes running through the ships that, due to vibration, show this material coming out. And in the early 1980s, I testified before the United States Congress talking about this. They're still there, unfortunately. Even on some of the protective clothing, like this anti-flash hood and long gloves worn by sailors, and their gloves to hold hot shells when they pop out of the cannons. Who are some of the more famous sailors? Well, Admiral Zumwalt on your right, and Steve McQueen's mesothelioma was thought to be due to some of the time that he spent in the Navy. Merchant seamen have had a lot of exposure to asbestos. They continue today to have exposure to asbestos. And the studies have verified that this is a group that is at high risk of developing asbestos-related disease. Painters. Painters have been studied to show excess of lung cancer. They have been exposed to spackling compounds. Petrochemical workers. These are pipe insulations, and you can see what they look like. And these studies have shown multiple uses in this industry, and reports of mesothelioma. One of the first reports of mesothelioma was in 2 refinery foremen in 1960 in Beaumont, Texas, that developed mesothelioma. These were case reports before any epidemiological studies had been done. The Canadian studies have shown this. Plasters and drywallers. This is the old plasterer on the left and the new drywallers on the right, but both of these have exposures. Multiple studies, again, have reported excesses of these diseases. Plumbers and pipe fitters. Asbestos is found in the homes, and the plumbers and pipe fitters that come to your homes are exposed and develop these diseases. Power plant workers have been known to develop asbestos-related diseases. Railroad workers, here they're applying insulation on the old steam railroad. Here we have pipe insulation inside of the steam. We have asbestos gaskets where exposures are occurring. The railroad worker studies have been fairly extensive, showing issues dating back many, many years. The railroad industry even recognized back in the 1930s the asbestos hazards and talked about it. Refinery workers, roofers, 85% of our asbestos used in this country today is in the roofing industry, I'm told. And again, studies have confirmed that these workers are developing disease. Rubber workers, again, due to the talc that was used in this industry contaminated with tremolite, these workers have had advanced cases of the disease. This I'm going to take a few minutes on because shipyard workers are important, not just to this country, but through the rest of the world. Ships are being decommissioned today that were made with asbestos during World War II and after World War II. They're decommissioning these because they're becoming outdated. And when they do that, they usually bank them up on a shore in a country like Bangladesh or India, and they bring out the workers to tear them apart. And they usually don't do much to protect those workers. Now I've got probably 100 slides that are much more graphic than this, but you'll see the workers up on top and they're just blowing this off, and they carry the materials home, and they use every bit of scrap in the ships to sell it to make money in their countries. Here's some in our country where they made the ships, and I just show these for historical significance, but here they're eating, here they're making some pipe wrapping back in World War II, and this is what it looks like when it goes on to some of the pipes in the ships. Here's a rusty old hulk of a ship, and these are in dry dock waiting to be torn apart. Here's one that's being pulled up. You can see the workers on the shore getting ready to pull these up. And this is after they've started pulling some of the materials off. Well, the studies have shown that shipyard workers can be exposed in multiple ways. So many different ways, we really don't know all the ways that they're exposed. Smelter workers. The asbestos has been used for multiple uses in smelter workers. School teachers. Here's a school that we visited when I first came to the Public Health Service, 1971 in Lander, Wyoming. It's a Quonset hut. Look at the inside. That's asbestos. Sprayed with asbestos. This is in our country in Lander, Wyoming, 1971. We found there were many more schools in this country that looked like this. This little boy in the middle has a sampler on. We usually don't put samplers on little boys in school. We usually put them on workers. But we found in this little boy, he had higher concentration of asbestos than workers in some of these other occupational settings that I've just talked about. School teachers, they've been reported to develop asbestos-related disease from working in the schools like this school. Many of the ceilings in the United Kingdom, they've come out with a warning, and they're concerned about asbestos in their school systems. And from the use of pin boards, I've noticed that that has been outlawed now, I think, or at least a warning. Lori can tell us more about that. They used to use modeling clay, even up to 1967, Melton Bradley, you know, our game company that sold us Monopoly. They also sold clay that contained asbestos that was used in schools for modeling purposes. We've heard about crayons containing asbestos. Kids chewing on the crayons, grinding them up. Steel workers, a lot of asbestos in this industry, and a lot of documentation of disease. Sulfate mill workers that used in preparation of paper products have been shown to develop excess of mesothelioma. Welders, again, excess disease. There are over 1 million workers exposed to asbestos in the United States that we know of, but what we don't know is the unknown numbers of consumers that are exposed to asbestos. Up to 5,000 consumer products have contained asbestos, and some of these are in lamp sockets, floor tiles. What about cat box fill with vermiculite? And vermiculite itself that is used in the garden, and talc contaminated with asbestos. Here are a group of occupations that have never been studied that have exposure to asbestos. Things like garden workers, people that repair dishwashers. I've seen case reports of mesothelioma occurring in Sears repairmen as one case, elevator repair workers, paper mill workers, and even toll booth operators. Here are the statistics that show us some of the most frequently reported cases of occupations with asbestosis. Plumbers, pipe fitters, in this one study led the list. Managers and administrators that may have worked their way up to that, there's no epidemiology on those studies. So if you took a case of a manager that had mesothelioma into litigation in this country, that'd be thrown right back at you. Say, well, there's no epidemiology of that, so obviously that's not a problem. Insulation workers, supervisors, truck drivers. There's never been studies of truck drivers, and they've developed disease. Managers, housewives. Again, this category of supervisors and proprietors tends to come up a lot. In the Navy, there seems to have been a large number of admirals that have developed mesothelioma. All again because of latency. These people started at the bottom and worked their way up. These are the most frequent for mesothelioma in the statistics: carpenters, teachers, farmers, electricians. Is it necessary to study each and every occupation before drawing conclusions? Well, my answer is no, it's not. We can't possibly study every occupation. What's the cause of asbestos-induced diseases? Is it the occupation? No, it's not the occupation. Or is it the exposure to asbestos? And the unequivocal answer is yes. This man in this ad in the Canadian Auto Workers, and we have some Canadian auto workers here with us, that I like the catch that I didn't go to work to die. I think that's very appropriate. Most of us didn't go to work to die. It's time to take control. We need to ban asbestos.